We're getting kind of rival narratives, the Republicans. Not surprisingly, things are terrible. Inflation continues to charge ahead. The Democrats are like, oh no, things have gotten a lot better. We've licked inflation. So how do we adjudicate between these rival camps and say this is what's really happening?
Look, I think, both sides are a little bit self-serving, and I think the reality is somewhere in the middle, but I'd say closer to the Republican narrative. I mean, what we're seeing from the Democrats at the moment is a lot of numbers being pushed forward to suggest that the economy is doing well, and then what we've been seeing is those numbers being revised down months later. So I think there's a lot of sort of political posturing, if you will. Look at the employment numbers, for example. They overstated jobs by 730,000 in the last 3 quarters alone. That's 81,000 fake jobs a month. Now, we've made some progress with inflation, right? Headline inflation has been coming down, but it's proving very, very sticky for the Fed. And in the process of bringing inflation down, we're now seeing recession alarm bells ringing. So, that's why I say I think the Republican narrative is probably more accurate. We haven't managed to iron out the inflation. We have recession on the horizon. And on the back of all of this, and I think we've discussed this before, we're now seeing globally a shift away from the US dollar, which I think will be a big problem domestically in years to come.
Let's look at those two things separately. I want to start with the sort of inflation / recession. Now, obviously, inflation and recession are opposites. We know where inflation comes from, right? It comes from radical overspending, pumping in all this money into the economy, more and more money chasing the same number of goods, and so prices go up. Now, what I want to ask is, how do we get recession? Is it because the Federal Reserve, alarmed at inflation, sort of like hits the brakes with kind of like slamming on the brakes with the car, and then you go in the opposite direction, and so you go from one curse really to the opposite curse? Is that what's happening?
It's essentially correct. It's a case of pick your poison. I speak to a lot of people and they're hopeful that, somehow we'll tame inflation and the economy will continue to boom. But these are sort of opposite sides of the spectrum. Look at house prices, for example. Housing accounts for about 30% of the inflation metric, right? So if the government want to get inflation under control, what do? They raise interest rates, right? By doing so, they make purchasing homes more expensive, it kills demand, and it drives value down.